A tough road ahead for Afghanistan as peace talks are unexpectedly postponed. So is there an end in sight to the country's more than 17-year-long war? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Taliban leaders and Afghan officials were set to meet in Doha, Qatar, to work out a roadmap for peace, but now those talks have reportedly been delayed. It's the latest setback in efforts to reach a negotiated settlement that would end the long conflict in Afghanistan. In the next half hour, we're going to take an in-depth look at Afghanistan, and for that I'm joined by my colleague, Sean Callebs, who just returned from assignment there in Afghanistan. Sean, nice to have you on the show. Of course, Afghanistan is not new to you. You've been there both as a correspondent and a diplomat. But this visit, this time round, what did you see that's different?
This time, I think that the tension, especially in Kabul, is so heightened. And last time I was there was 2014, 5 years ago, ahead of the presidential election. And it was a city of about 3.6 million. Now it's a city of more than 5 million. And so much of the U.S. money and other money from nations that have been working toward Afghanistan peace are now moving out. So there's almost this desperation for money, how to make a way forward. Organized crime has become a problem. But the biggest thing I noticed was just the security everywhere. You can't avoid it. Blast walls are set up outside of virtually any building of significance with a razor wire on the top, so much so that it was difficult to pick out landmarks driving around Kabul. They have this thing called the Ring of Steel, where the national police can stop any vehicle that comes in, and they search quite a bit. You're talking about all this traffic, and there's not one traffic light that I saw working in Kabul. So it's chaos, it's frustration, and a lot of anxiety about what the future.
You talked about money coming into the country. Of course, there are investments from China, there are investments from the United States, of course, and from India as well. How is the country's economy doing?
Not great, not well at all. I think that if you talk to people who are in Afghanistan's government, they believe if the nation's ever going to make a run on its own, it has to have outside investment. China, with its Belt and Road, has been eager. They've invested. There's an area about 60 kilometers south called Mes Aynak, which really means Copper Mountain, and China invested $3 billion in that. And they were never able to take any compromise because of the security issues. There are all these jewels, emeralds, rubies, sapphires in the Panjshir Valley in the mountains there. They are being mined to a degree, but they're not being exported, and the people who are doing the mining legally, who would like to pay taxes to the Afghan government, they're not able to do that. It's very difficult. Without the money coming in from the U.S. and China and other entities propping it up, you really get the sense it could collapse almost instantly without that infusion of money.
Right, and talking about security, Sean, what kind of presence does the Taliban have there?
Taliban presence has grown significantly. They control an estimated 50% of the land within Afghanistan. And again, that's something that you always fear as well. Anytime you go outside of Kabul, you have to take that into account. We went to Bamyan, which is like I think it was maybe a 200-kilometer drive, something like that, or less, and it could have been a very short drive, but you have to go through Wardak and other Taliban strongholds, so we were not able to make that drive. Even going to the Panjshir Valley, which we had a chance to do, which is an unbelievably beautiful area, and it's an area that basically comes down, there's one road in and one road out, and that led to the Soviets' demise during their invasion in 1980. The Taliban has never made inroads into Panjshir Valley, but they do hold strongholds outside, so we had to be careful about going there, and we tried to make our drive during the daytime. It didn't work out in the end, but you're always worried about the Taliban. And by all indications, they want peace, at least the major faction of the Taliban.
Do they have much support in Afghanistan among ordinary people?
I think that there's a great deal of fear. I think that's the best way I would put it, because there's no question that women, children have made vast inroads, and the majority of people in Afghanistan now are very young. The women want to continue to go to school, they want to continue to succeed, but they're worried if the Taliban comes back into power, what happens to them?
Now, as we reported earlier, the latest round of peace talks have been postponed. Those talks were supposed to have taken place in Qatar, in Doha. The Taliban has actually announced a spring offensive. Now, you talked with the former president, Hamid Karzai. What are his thoughts on the future of his country?
Well, it's interesting because Karzai and a number of other people have worked almost on a parallel discussion to try to get the Taliban to the negotiating table. President Ashraf Ghani, who's been president for the past 5 years, is up for re-election, had largely been excluded from those talks. But recently, he met with Karzai and everybody else, trying to get everyone under the same tent. There was a lot of optimism that the Taliban's tired of fighting. At the top of the show, we talked about 17 years. It's really been close to 40 years that this nation has been under constant war. 2 generations of people knowing nothing but fighting and strife and misery. And this seemed like the best chance. And Karzai talked about it. The Taliban has been adamant that they will not negotiate with the Afghan government. They will bring, if women leaders from the nation want to come to talk, they have indicated they will take part in those talks. So this is really a serious hiccup, but without question, I think that President Karzai still sees a road to peace for the future, and that's what we talked about with him extensively.
I'm much more hopeful than ever before, for one simple reason, that this time the Americans seem to want it, and that they have the cooperation of Pakistan as well. The fact that a great many leaders of the Taliban movement are now in Doha for these talks is a sign of that. That means Pakistan is permitting these leaders to travel, which is good for us, which is good for the country. And also that means that the Americans are serious. In the past, to these movements of the Taliban leaders into the talks, both the Pakistanis and the Americans were the impediment. They do not want it. So the fact that the US is now keen to have peace and to end fighting in Afghanistan is a good sign, and I'm supporting it. As strongly as I oppose their war making in Afghanistan, I support their effort for peace in Afghanistan.
You've been quoted as saying that the US-Afghan partnership, relationship, has been a failure. Can you expand on that, and what could have been done in hindsight early on?
Well, I've been very, very vocal on that. I've rather spoken with too much repetition on these issues. The US came to Afghanistan to defeat extremism and to bring security. None of that happened. Rather, we lost thousands and thousands of lives. Our president announced a month or so ago that only in the past 5 years we have lost 45,000 of our security forces. That's an immense loss. And for what? Where did we fight but in our own villages? So it's been a disastrous failure as far as security is concerned, as far as fight against extremism is concerned, and as far as bringing stability and security to Afghanistan is concerned. But yes, the US and Western effort and others as well with them have had some contributions to education in Afghanistan, to the well-being of some elements, parts of population in Afghanistan, and things like that, for which we are grateful.
Would it, in hindsight, the Taliban is now at the negotiating table. If the Taliban would have been brought in much earlier, you again say the Taliban are part of Afghanistan. They should have been part of this process.
Yes, they are.
What could have been done in hindsight where from 2001 to 2019, all these lives wouldn't have been lost, all the heartbreak, all the destruction?
I very much believe that the Taliban should have been on board the whole system from the very beginning. They should have been in the Bonn talks in 2001. They should have been there as participants and as stakeholders.
In Bonn.
In Bonn, 2001. And when, in 2001 again, when I declared a general amnesty to all, that should have been recognized by the United States. That should have been respected. So nothing of that nature of things that would have settled us down into peace and security was permitted. Rather, work was done against it.
To the outside world, when they hear the word Taliban, you know what much of the world thinks. What can you tell people now that the Taliban are at the negotiating table, they are talking, they do want peace. What can you tell people moving forward? What will happen to women? What will happen to children? What will happen to education?
These areas of social progress are definitely to move forward. I have my children in Afghanistan. I have my daughters being raised in Afghanistan. I want an educated daughter. I want a daughter that's at par with any other girl in the world in terms of education and her rights to prosper and move forward and contribute to her own life, family, and the country and the larger society. That's something that the Taliban understand. That's something that we spoke to about also in Moscow when we met in Moscow. So there are areas of life that, like every other society, Afghanistan also has to move forward. The most important of that is the right of our people to education, especially in particular the right of our women to education, work, all other social, political, and economic activities.
It's a wonderful statement, and certainly everybody hopes it moves that way.
We have it, and we will have it more of it.
We interviewed a young woman engineer who's helping rebuild Darliman Palace.
Wonderful.
And she's a
Yes.
brilliant young lady, educated
Wonderful.
in the U.S., could have gone anywhere. She's worried. What could you tell her about her future?
She is right to be worried, but we must also tell her that she should not be worried, that we will stand by her and that we will make sure that Afghanistan, that she envisages the Afghanistan that we will have.
What is it like sitting down with the Taliban, arguably people who've been the enemy for almost a generation? How can you move forward? What sort of issues come up?
The moment we found ourselves all in that hall in the President Hotel in Moscow, without any other presence, all Afghans, without any foreign presence, immediately we were all Afghans. Immediately we were complaining about the same things in life. Immediately we were all wishing for peace in Afghanistan. Immediately each one of us was trying to do better for peace than the other one. And most important, immediately there were people who went across. Some Taliban spoke more openly and rightly about the future of Afghanistan than some of us did. And some of us did more in support of their ideas than some of them did. So it was a society again, with all the elements, all the, thinking lines and the rest.
Also, you've been very vocal about the U.S. support of Pakistan when, in the early days, the insurgents went into the mountains and the U.S. continued military aid for Pakistan. How did that set this country back?
That set this country back immensely. That not only set us back immensely, but that cost us tens of thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands of lives. And so much suffering and so much lack of trust in the U.S. for what the U.S. is up to in this region. You keep accusing Pakistan of harboring extremism, and then you keep paying them billions of dollars. It doesn't tally. You can't figure out as to why, other than, well, maybe they have other thoughts, other plans. That said, Pakistan is a neighbor. The Pakistani people have been tremendously kind to us for the past 40 years. No other nation would have been as nice to us as they were, as they continue to be the people of Pakistan. It's the government of Pakistan that we complain against, not the people. Now, too, that they have begun to work for peace in Afghanistan. They've begun to help the peace process in Afghanistan together with the Americans, jointly with the Americans. We want to reassure Pakistan that Afghanistan will be the best of their friend if they extend a dignified hand of friendship, towards a future of trust and civilized relationship.
Donald Trump has been very vocal in saying it's time for the U.S. to pull out of Afghanistan. And you've been very clear that you don't think the U.S. is just going to abandon this country. Too much is at stake.
Exactly that. Exactly that. We were never against the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. But we wanted the U.S. presence in Afghanistan to be a contributor to peace and stability in Afghanistan and to good neighborly relations between us and our neighbors. We want a U.S. presence that's here, that stabilizes Afghanistan, that has its own larger ambitions as well, but not one that would cause troubles from here to Iran, not one that would make Afghanistan a place for confrontation between interests of big powers. We want the Russians and the Americans to be cooperative in Afghanistan. We want the Chinese and the Americans to be cooperative in Afghanistan. We want Afghanistan to be a place of positive rivalry, of each one trying to do better than the other one in Afghanistan. And to that we want to contribute. So if the US can stay here and look after its larger interest in that ambit, in that framework of making Afghanistan a place of cooperation, we'll be very, very happy and welcome them. That's exactly what the Russians want in Afghanistan. That's exactly what the Chinese want in Afghanistan. And I've seen, look, the moment the US started this peace process, both Russia and China began to help the US. They had meetings, and that's a good sign.
China's been very out in the forefront. China's been doing a lot more, I think, than the international community knows. How active has China been, firstly? And secondly, what do you think the Belt and Road could mean for Afghanistan? Going through Silk Road, this country needs economic investment if it's going to survive.
Yes. China has been a great neighbor. China has been steadily and constantly seeking peace in Afghanistan because that's very much in China's interest. And we recognize and respect that. The Belt and Road project is a massively important project for Afghanistan. It has all the potentials, all the means of bringing Afghanistan upwards to a better life, to trade and transit and better economic opportunities. So we are entirely for it, entirely.
What are some of the projects? Because Silk Road cuts right through the heart of this country. It's such a part of its history. And I know China wanted to invest in Mes Aynak, but the security was never there. How do you bridge that?
They did invest in Mes Aynak. They invested nearly
$3 billion.
$5 billion. They promised that. It's something that they now co-own with the Afghan government. They've invested there. We want them to invest more in Afghanistan. Yes, lack of security was an element preventive of progress there. Exactly for that reason, we believe that Chinese presence in Afghanistan and in a cooperative mode with Russia and the US will be contributed to Afghanistan's stability and economic well-being. The Belt and Road has myriad ways of helping Afghanistan. Better roads, better connectivity, trade and linkages and
just investment.
Just investment, and the crossroads activity, the roundabout of this region we are. And the busier this roundabout, the better we will be.
What about Russia? What do you see Russia's role?
Russia's role is tremendously for Afghanistan. It's a great neighbor of Afghanistan. We've had, among the nations of the world that we have had relations with, Russian relationship has been the oldest, among the oldest, centuries old relationship. And then Russia is a superpower, which is our neighbor, just like China, superpower, our neighbor. So there is another superpower, that's the United States, that's present in Afghanistan. We very much want a better management of these superpowers in Afghanistan and their relationships in Afghanistan. So Russia has been of tremendous help. You saw how effectively they convened the Moscow talks, and how they allowed us to go there, but they were not seen there at all. So it became an entirely, truly Afghan event. And I'm glad that presence is in support of our peace, and now on Afghanistan in a better understanding with the US.
You know, talking to you, I go back to 2002 when I first met you, and everybody had so much hope. This was a
Yes, we
much
all
different country.
Yes.
I don't think that either of us thought that 18 years later there'd be so many blast walls, razor wires, troops.
Sadly.
What can you say about the future to give people hope? They need hope.
Peace and the current movement towards peace, and we very much wish the United States to succeed in this, and we will be very much with them on this, and we want the United States to have the best cooperation and support from neighboring countries, especially from major powers like China and Russia, and from our neighbors Iran and Pakistan. It's vitally important for us, this superpowers, to have a common position on peace in Afghanistan, and the neighbors, especially Iran and Pakistan and Uzbekistan, to have a common position on Afghanistan. We, the Afghan people, will give them the best of our efforts and support. And that's what is needed, and that's what we'll do. So Afghanistan, with this current effort, will be peaceful. It is also for us Afghans to be wiser, to be tolerant, and to understand that there can be different points of view, but united and in our own country.
There are many who presume a new Afghanistan could look divided, with the Taliban in control of Kandahar, Helmand, Khost, some other areas. Do you ever see that happening?
No, I don't see that. No, I don't see that. They are part of Afghanistan. They have all the right to be in the Afghan government. They have all the right to fight elections and to win elections, to be part of the governing system, to become the heads of state, to become ministers, to be part of this whole structure of our society. And that's exactly what they feel too. But we will be a united country, and we'll have maybe someone who was a Taliban person in the past, someday the governor of some province, and maybe someone who was fighting against them, the governor of another province, just like we did in the past 18 years. Just like when we started the Mujahideen and the former communists and all those rivalries, suddenly it disappeared. Suddenly they were all members of parliament there, suddenly they were working together, suddenly they were part of the structure together. And that's what will happen.
Do you see yourself
and we
working?
must make sure that happens.
Do you see yourself working with Donald Trump? He's been an erratic president, and one moment he says, I'm taking all the troops out for safety, and next he says we need security in the region.
Well, for all his tweets and talks, he doesn't make sense on Afghanistan, and we support him on Afghanistan.
Explain.
He makes sense because he wants to end fighting in Afghanistan. That's what he wants. That's a vital need of our country. So we're in full support of his efforts to end fighting in Afghanistan and bring us peace. And after we have peace and the fighting ends, if they want to stay in Afghanistan in some form, let them come forward and ask the Afghan people, let's make a deal.
What do you think, and this may be an unfair question, but what do you think the international perception is of Afghanistan if people only read the headlines?
If people only read the headlines in the Western press, they'll be disappointed. But that's not the whole truth. That has not been all along. Therefore, hopefully with peace, those headlines will also change.
What about yourself? You've been president 2 terms, sat out 1. The Constitution's somewhat ambiguous. Do you see yourself running for president?
No, not at all. Not at all. I will not be. There were candidates for election a few months ago. I did not do that. I will not be running for election whether the Constitution allows it or not. I will not be coming back to power officialdom in any capacity, never. Neither interim nor non-interim nor elected. I've done my time. My service to the country will be the most effective the way I am, and peace is what I'm working for. That is my citizenship's right, and that I will work for to bring to the country.
What about the committee that's working toward peace? There are young people on.
Yes, that's a good thing.
Exactly. Talk to me about who is on this, and what do you think the youth are learning?
It is not completed yet. The committee has to form itself properly and then be announced. We had a preliminary meeting. We want this peace effort to be a piece of all of us together. We can't be divided and work for peace. We have to be united and work for peace. And then also unite with the Taliban, and then as an Afghan nation work for peace and deal with the rest of the world. So the committee has to be completed, has to be added to, has to be shaped better, and then it will function better. That's what we are trying to accomplish.
Great conversation there, Sean, with the former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai. As he pointed out, security and peace very elusive in the country, but he was optimistic, wasn't he? He feels that there are better days ahead.
He does feel that there are better days ahead. The question is that based in reality or what he wants? He talked about the U.S. and Donald Trump wanting peace and wanting to get out of the region, but obviously the U.S. forces have been a huge part of bringing a certain degree of stability, at least keeping the Taliban from taking control of the country. So will it happen? Secondly, remember, the president is Ashraf Ghani, and he was not in those talks in Moscow. And he feels that in many ways there have been people who have been pushing for peace efforts, maybe to chip away at his authority and make him a more vulnerable candidate when the presidential elections do happen. They were supposed to happen in April, then July, now scheduled for September. So like everything else with Afghanistan, so much is up in the air and none of it is clear, and none of it right now points in a positive direction.
And the young engineer that you talked with there, her name Fareshta Nouri, also optimistic in a sense. Interesting background. She was educated in the United States, went back to Afghanistan.
Exactly. She actually was a refugee in Iran before that, and she could have gone anywhere. And I talked to her about why come back? Why put yourself at risk? You have so much to lose. And she said even her friends in college begged her not to come back, but this is why she said she wanted to come back.
I think if we don't build our country, who's going to do that? And if we don't return to Afghanistan, we don't have the right to complain about the situation. We have to fix it. Yes, there has been many different reasons for the situation that Afghanistan has right now, or like the war that it has gone through, but still, we are responsible. This is our country.
Sean, you were there for a little over 3 weeks. Did you worry about your personal safety?
Sure. I think every moment we went outside, you can't help to. I mean, we're an attractive target. The Taliban didn't go away. They're basically underground. We had a couple of instances that were uncomfortable, but nothing terrible happened.
And you did come back with a few scrapes. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we went to the Panjshir Valley to do a story on emerald mining up there. And to anybody who's never been there, it's just a beautiful area, but the mountains are huge, anywhere from 12 to 16,000 feet, 4 to 5 meters, 5,000 meters. And they do mining in the caves that the Mujahideen used to hide in when they were fighting the Soviets. So those caves are very rugged, but they blast for emeralds. And remember, it's spring and it's snowy up there. So what happened after they were blasting, an avalanche literally came raining down upon us. And it was frightening. It happened so fast. Most everybody else got inside the mine and was okay. I was one of the unlucky ones and got kind of swept over the hill with ice and rocks coming over me. Just a few scrapes and bruises and a good story to tell, but I'm glad it was no worse than that.
Sort of strange. One never associates avalanches with Afghanistan, does one?
You really, but it does happen. I mean, they have the big Solange tunnel that leads from the north to the south, and periodically they have big avalanches up there. Badakhshan Mountains are as high as 25,000 feet, so yeah, it's huge.
What's up next? What are you working on?
We have a lot of stories coming up, and we're going to break them out in a series, and they're going to be very good. We got some amazing people, and we're looking at the future, everything through Afghans' eyes. A lot of women discussions. We talked to a human rights advocate. We talked more with Fareshta, the engineer. We talked with an archaeologist from Bamyan, and Bamyan, of course, is that beautiful area along Silk Road, populated by the Hazara population, where the giant Buddhas were, where the Taliban blew those up in March of 2001. We actually take you to that site, take you to where the rubble of the former Buddhas are, show you what happened, and we met the man the Taliban forced to plant those explosives. So we got some good stuff.
So we will be looking forward to all those reports. Sean, thanks a lot for being with us on The Heat.
Thank you.
And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.